If you want to get strong as fuck with the kettlebells while losing weight, these 5 exercises are a must in your kettlebell training routine. Because the 5 exercises I'm about to show you today lay a strong foundation for rapidly expanding your exercise arsenal with the kettlebell. With that said, let's dive in. Exercise number 1 is the classic Kettlebell Suite. And the reason that this one is an absolute must inside of your exercise routine is that it expands to so many other skills with the kettlebell. We can do something like a single arm swing that's going to transition to something like a kettlebell clean or a kettlebell snatch later on. Not to mention there's a ton of swing variations that we can do. Anything from an alternating kettlebell swing variation from hand to hand, and we could even do something like a dead stop swing for those of you who have a hard time returning the bell back down to the ground here. And with this here, we have a few different benefits, one of which is crucial, which is learning that hinge pattern that keeps our back safe, as well as developing explosive power in our hips. Exercise number 2 is the single arm overhead press. Learning the single arm overhead press is a must, and this is an absolute staple inside of my training regimen personally when trying to get strong with the kettlebell. And the reason for that is that it develops fantastic shoulder strength. Not to mention when you offset a kettlebell to one side, what we get is this interesting lateral core stability that happens on the opposite side. So in other words, if I'm holding the kettlebell in my left hand, my right oblique is going to fire super hard to make sure that I'm not leaning while performing said exercise. The other thing about it is that there's a skill that transfers over to so many other exercises with the kettlebell. And that skill is learning the front rack position, making sure that you have that kettlebell properly racked, which is going to carry over to anything from catching your kettlebell cleans all the way to something like a single arm front squat. With that said, the single arm strict press is an absolute staple for developing upper body strength with the kettlebell, and can even be included in complexes where you smoothly transition from one exercise to the next using something like a kettlebell clean to a single arm front squat, to a single arm overhead press, which is why it is a staple, because it's great for time under tension with the bell. Exercise number 3 is the Goblet Squat. The reason the Goblet Squat is a must-have inside of your training regimen, especially when you're first getting started with the kettlebell, is because of the prerequisite mobility that it demands. Whenever you're holding a kettlebell in front of you, it actually requires more ankle mobility than something like a back squat when you have a barbell sitting on your back. Because if I were to take something like a kettlebell and treat it like a barbell back squat and bring my chest forward and hips back, I suddenly have to use my arms a whole lot to hold the weight up. What we actually want to see is your knees driving over the toes. When your knees drive over the toes here, we have a much more upright torso, but that can only be accomplished if you have that prerequisite ankle mobility and hip mobility, which is why this one's an absolute staple. If you get your hip mobility and ankle mobility dialed in where you can accomplish a really good looking goblet squat, suddenly your exercise arsenal with the kettlebell is going to rapidly expand beyond that, because remember what we said about that single arm overhead press and learning that front rack position. We can easily turn that exact same goblet squat into something like a single arm front squat later on down the road. So learning to do this fundamentally first before adding this added challenge of lateral core stability from something like a single arm front squat later on is going to be key in maximizing your development for building a strong foundation to optimize your strength. Exercise number 4 is the single arm row. The reason the single arm row is a must-have inside of your training regimen is that the pulling exercise is going to balance the pushing exercises that you do. Something that often gets overlooked, especially for those of us who are working at a desk and spending a lot of time in this hunched position here, is we don't have enough exercises that help pull us back into a good posture. When we take the time to do something like a single arm row, which is a pulling exercise, we actually take our scapula and we retract it, which is great for our posture. Not to mention we're having to work on maintaining a flat back throughout the entirety of the movement like this. Now, because we are pulling and because we're working those postural muscles on the backside of our body, we're able to maintain muscular balance across the joint. And anytime we can do that, we're going to make ourselves healthier overall. Because if you end up getting in this posture where we're constantly doing pushing exercises, we're constantly in the front rack position, we're eventually going to get to this kyphotic posture that is so often accompanies the desk work that so many of us do these days, which we want to combat with something like the single arm row. Not to mention, this here is going to carry over to multiple variations of the row later on down the road, where you can get into some fancy stuff like a single arm ballistic row later on, once you get the fundamentals down of the single arm row first. Which leads us to our 5th and final movement, which is the Turkish Get Up. And the reason the Turkish Get Up is a must-have inside of your regimen if you're looking to maximize your strength with the kettlebell is that this movement will hit your core from every single angle imaginable. It is truly a full body exercise, and it challenges so many different facets of fitness. It challenges our mobility in the hips, it challenges our stability in the shoulder, it challenges our core stability, and with that, when you can hit so much with one exercise, why wouldn't you have it inside of your training regimen? This exercise here is one that truly takes someone from a beginner level in kettlebell to the intermediate level. And if you can show control through the full range of motion of something like a Turkish Get Up, what you'll end up finding is that your core strength will be off the charts. So often we end up focusing on that six-pack muscle, so we get used to working our core in one plane of motion, and we can hit all three planes of motion, the frontal, the sagittal, the transverse, with one exercise while getting the shoulder stability benefit, hip mobility benefit. It's a little of everything, and that is why this is the fifth and final exercise that is a must-have. You're looking to take your strength to the moon with the kettlebell. Based on these 5 exercise descriptions, which one do you feel like you need most in your training regimen? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below, and if you found this video helpful, go ahead and smash that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.